And hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar in the Full Compass Full Access webinar series. It's good to have all of you here. My name is Jim Ripp. I am the Manager of Technical Training and Sales Development here at Full Compass Systems. And let me bring my camera up here so you can see me. Yes, I look exactly like the picture. So this series, we bring you guys let us know what subject you want to hear about, and we bring you the industry expert to talk about that subject. And today we have Andy Doc Brown with us, super excited about this, to talk about the Helix. So before we get into the presentation here, let's take a look at real quick. I need to go over the format here, let you know that there are questions feature available for you. You can also put your comments in there if you want, but any of those comments or questions I will present to Andy during or after the presentation. And then there's a recording of the presentation if you have to duck out in the middle, no worries. It will be sent to you. You'll have a link, so you have the whole presentation. And for those of you that are watching live, there is a survey at the end. Fill that out, please put in the subjects that you want to know about, you want more webinars on. And then that's where we bring you and we decide which industry expert we're going to bring to you. So let's move on here real quick. And Andy, or Doc, should I say, if you could unmute your mic and bring yourself up here, bring up your camera, that would be awesome. And I'm looking through, hey, there he is.
Hey, Jim.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again. I haven't seen you since yesterday. So I'm looking at your bio here, and the thing that really sticks out to me is a master's degree. I know how difficult it is to get a degree in just a bachelor's in music, but a master's, and I know how difficult it is to play jazz. Master's degree in jazz performance is outstanding. That's incredible. So guitar player, obviously you've got the color guitar I wanted all my life, purple, perfect. I love it. So tell us, the audience, a little bit about yourself and your musical background, as well as your technical background, if you could, just real brief, anything outside of this bio.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I've been playing guitar for over half my life now. So since I was a teenager, I started. And before that, I've always had, my parents were big into classic rock and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I got into music and guitar. Took piano lessons as a kid. And then when it was time to, go out into the real world, I had to pick something. And I just stuck with guitar and have been doing it ever since. And very fortunate to be here just playing guitar and talking about gear. It's awesome.
So Chicago area, no doubt you got some blues running through you there in your playing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
right. All right,
so we fan of Buddy Guy.
Are we gonna hear some of that today? Are you gonna play some different styles for us? And
yeah, I'll give us a taste of some different styles. I'll kind of keep it in the vein of some, popular or modern house of worship context, but I'll also break out from that too.
Probably enough to make me want to quit playing guitar. That's not difficult to do. All right, so Andy or Doc, I'm gonna send this presentership over to you, and I'll have you take it away. And while we're taking care of this, folks, again, the question and comment feature that you have there, feel free to type those in. Those will come directly to me, and then I will present those to Doc throughout the presentation. And I am going to close out my video here and let you take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Once again, my name is Doc Brown. I'm a product specialist with Line 6, and going to be hanging out for a little bit here, and we're going to be talking about Helix and any other Line 6 product you may have questions on, and why it's a great solution for those house of worship performance situations. So let's just get started with some sounds straight off the bat. I have some presets that I prepared specifically for this presentation to give you some ideas of the different sounds in Helix. Yeah, so let's go ahead and dive right in. I think for starters, I'm going to go ahead And just pull up the editor here. I want to show you some of the stuff that's inside the Helix and talk through the signal chain so we kind of know what we're going to hear before we even hear it. So for starters, I'm using a Fender twin style model here. Very clean, straight up the middle type of amp. Takes pedals really well, so any of these effects that we're going to hear are going to come through very nicely. Just kind of taking a tour of my effects before we hear them. I've got this nice tube compressor at the top, classic Tima overdrive, which we'll hear how that sounds. A little bit of chorus, two different reverbs for different playing situations, and this cool effect called the dual delay. It actually has two delay times built into one effect block here. So let's just go ahead, have a quick tour of these sounds, some of the things Helix can do. Oops. So I'm just going to start here, just playing it clean. I have that compressor and just a little bit of reverb on here. Really nice clean sound happening there. Let's start messing with some of the effects in here just to hear some of the stuff that's going on under the hood. One of my favorite overdrives in here is going to be the Tima, based off that popular Timmy style overdrive. And I love this because it's a really transparent sounding overdrive. It's going to start pushing the amp, but it's not going to give you sort of any real coloring. So it really preserves the guitar and the amp's tone. So now we have something kind of like this happening. Maybe if I want to add a little bit of ambience to this moment, I might go ahead and click on this octo reverb, which is going to go ahead and add a bit of reverb, but also a bit of some octaves happening over that. It's really great for ambient settings. Obviously, this sound is super popular in modern house of worship playing. So we have a little bit of a sound like this.
Hey, Andy, Doc.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we did in the test, if you could drop just the overall output a hair, and this has nothing to do with your end, it has to do with the go-to webinar is kind of reading that signal a little hot and pushing it down a little bit. So
Sure, no worries. Thanks for
try
calling
that
that out.
again.
Yeah, one more time for everybody here. Let's see.
Nice.
Great. Thank you, Jim, for pointing that out. Hopefully that's sounding better, everybody. But yeah, that's just a little, this preset I've called the all-in-one preset, basically because it has kind of all your staple sounds in it, that sort of clean platform amp, overdrive to push it over the edge, a few different reverbs depending on the situation, and also that dual delay that I mentioned. Let's go ahead and hear that real quick. Really awesome sounding delay happening there. So let's just check out a few other sounds, and then I'll kind of take you through why Helix is a great solution for these types of situations. So I'm just going to navigate to my next preset here. This one I've called ambient, and if we kind of run through it real quick, I'll do it on the unit this time. Really easy to get around Helix. I can use this joystick to arrow across my screen. What's also really cool is that each of these foot switches are also touch capacitive. So if I needed to quickly jump to my octave reverb, the same one we heard from before, I can just touch on the side of the foot switch here, and you're going to instantly notice that all of my effect parameters appear on these six knobs, right below the screen. And I could just do that with any effect if I want to quickly dial it in, if I need more or less of it. Some of these effects, like for instance, this delay, have a lot of parameters, and we could page over and access those. So tons of things to mess with and tweak with if that's kind of what you're into. But let's go ahead and hear this quick ambient tone, and then we'll check out some more sounds in the Helix. Awesome, that's kind of one of my favorite sounds I've come up for this. Just really peaceful sounding. Let's go ahead and check out a few more here. This one's a little different. This one is kind of sitting on the edge of breakup, and the amp I've chosen for this is a Brit J45 normal model. Basically kind of like a Marshall half stack. Maybe not the typical amp you're going to bring on stage when you go to play in church, but some of those tones, you know, those kind of cleaner to sitting on the edge of breakup tones really work well for a lot of this modern sort of house of worship sound. So let's go ahead and hear this amp, and maybe I'll even throw a little bit of that Chicago blues that Jim mentioned, but let's go ahead and just check out the tone of this. Really nice sound, just very sweet, very full, very lush sounding overdrive from that. Taking a look at this preset, if you want to dive in a little deeper to that sound, I do have this nice boost pedal up front, kind of modeled after that classic Echoplex preamp. Then I'm going into this Marshall amp. And if we take a look just at the amp model here, we're going to notice that all of our controls here basically are stuff that you find right on the front of the amp. You're not dealing with, you know, a whole bunch of crazy stuff up front. You have your drive, which is your preamp volume, classic EQ, bass, mid, and treble, presence, channel volume, and finally master. But if you did want to get a little more deep divey into the weeds type of things, you can actually affect how this amp feels. So it's not only, you know, when we talk about classic tube amps, their sound, but also their feel. You can adjust how they respond to your playing with things like sag, ripple, and bias. And sometimes when I show this guitar to guitar players, the immediate reaction is, oh boy, I didn't know guitar playing had to be this complicated. Well, it doesn't. I'm gonna also say that, you know, 90% of the time, I really don't mess with these parameters, but I love to show off that they're there, because if you're that person who loves to really get, you know, nitpicky about your tone and just, you know, searching for that perfect sound, you can get there with these types of things. So very cool. Also, just because tube amps, you know, it's just not the sound we're after, but the feel. Let's check out a few more sounds here. So I'm going to head back to my Helix, and we'll check out my next preset here. This one is pretty cool. I'm kind of basing this off of those people who are coming from, you know, the pedal board situation. A common thing for, you know, pedal board players is that they have multiple overdrives on their board. And the idea is that each of these overdrives can provide a different tonal flavor or shape your guitar tone in a different way, add some different coloration, and of course, variety. So let's check out some of these that I have set up. We'll hear them, we'll combine them, and we'll compare them and talk about what they're doing. So I'm just going to turn off this delay just so we can hear the amp and just these drives and all their great sonic glory. So let's start off with this one. It's called the Kinky Boost. It's based off the Exotic EP Booster, which is that Echoplex preamp type of thing I was talking about earlier. I have this set very conservatively if you check out my settings there, but this does really provide a nice tonal shaping to the thing. Sorry about that, looks like I got a notification there. let's go ahead and just hear this without the drives first. So we're just going to start with the amp, which is a Vox AC's 30 style model. Basic sound like this. So nice amp sound happening there, you know, just kind of pushing the edge of breakup. Let's go ahead and experiment with some of these drives. So that first one I mentioned, that's first in my signal chain, is going to be that boost. And though I have it set fairly low, you're going to hear how much it shapes my tone. So once again, just the tone of the amp and guitar. And then here's that boost added. Hopefully you can hear that that's really pushing my mids and low end there. So we're getting a nice tonal shaping. The next effect I'm going to show you after that is going to be the Minotaur, based off a very popular pedal called the Klon Centaur. And this one I'm also using just to add a bit of gain, but it really focuses the mids of my tone. So once again, we'll just hear that amp and guitar. And if I turn on this Minotaur effect, so once again, kind of subtle shaping happening there. And then finally, this one's probably the most dramatic the way I have it set up. This is the Heir Apparent, based off another extremely popular boutique pedal. That's going to be the Analog Man King of Tone. And this is a super cool effect just to have inside Helix, because if you want to, you know, order one right now, there's actually a 2-year wait. So get it now. Here it's how it sounds. So let's start combining these for their different tonal qualities here. Common thing to do among pedalboard players. So for instance, maybe we take the focus of that mid sound with that more gainy sound of this Heir Apparent here, and we get this type of thing. Or maybe I want to have that boost with this sort of overdriven sound. And then maybe the final combination would be the Minotaur plus this other EP booster here. Really interesting ways there to go ahead and get different combinations of different tones there. So let's keep moving along. I want to show you maybe 1 or 2 more presets, and then we'll talk about how you can actually use the Helix when you're performing live. All right. So the next preset I want to show you is this one called Snapshots. This is a really cool and powerful feature inside of Helix. So a snapshot is almost like having a preset within a preset, and it also does some other really cool, powerful things. So when you're changing snapshots, there's no audio gap. When you switch presets, you're going to have, you know, that couple milliseconds while the machine thinks and loads one rig out for the other. It also allows reverb and delay trails to spill over. So if you're playing, you know, a big solo and you have all your reverb and delay happening, as you go back to your rhythm part, that's all going to slowly die out instead of just an immediate cutoff, which can end up sounding more musical. And these are the items that are actually controlled by Snapshot. So you can turn individual effects, amps and cabs on and off. So if you're using a preset that has multiple amps, you could switch between them. You could turn different effects on and off. You could also have the parameters of those individual effects and amps move up and down. So up to 64 different things can change as you switch snapshots. So that means maybe your amp goes from a cleaner tone to a dirtier tone. Maybe your reverb goes up in the mix. Maybe your delay comes down, things like that. And then you could also send out commands if you're using Helix to control an external device. One thing I haven't really talked about yet is how friendly Helix is with all sorts of other analog gear. So as we're going to learn, Helix can easily be the centerpiece of your rig. It can be your command center to a larger rig as well. So some pretty cool things. And just a quick visual layout of what this might look like. You can see here I have 4 snapshots set up, and reading left to right is going to be my signal chain. So let's say a volume pedal, a wah, a compressor, an overdrive. We have 2 amps we can switch between, modulation, delay, reverb. And basically each iteration of this, each snapshot, if you will, is going to pull up a completely different set of effects and change each of those. So let's go ahead and hear how this sounds. I'm going to jump back to my Helix now, and we're going to check out some of these snapshots. So up here in the corner, if you want to follow along, you can tell what snapshots I'm on. This first one's just a basic clean sound, so it sounds a little bit like this. Next, I'm going to head to my second snapshot. This one is called crunch. So if we're following along here on my amp parameters, you're going to notice that a lot of these change. Let me jump back to the clean sound here. And basically my drive here is set about 2.5, EQ 7, 8, maybe 5, and then my channel volume's at 10. As I head to my crunch tone here, we're coming up on my drive, my EQ changes slightly, my presence, my channel volume all change. If we were actually to page over, you could actually see that I'm actually even changing mic models on the cab block. So you can get really into the weeds once again if you wanted to. But we heard that clean tone. Let's go ahead and hear that crunch sound now. Nice broken up sound there. The next one I have is called ambient. And when I hit this, you're going to notice all these effects on the second path are going to go ahead and turn on. So my reverbs and delays. And now we have this type of sound. Really lush sounding reverb there. And what's nice about this, like I said with snapshots, you can have all these reverb and delay trails spill over. So if I want to play in this ambient sound and I'm going to switch over to the lead in the middle there, oops, sorry, sometimes I'll accidentally trigger some of these touch capacitive foot switch things by touching them. You could actually turn that feature off for performance needs if you needed. But once again, I'm going to switch between the ambient to the lead sound, and we're going to hear now how all those reverb and delay trails kind of linger on after I switch. So once again, going ambient to lead. Maybe do that one more time. Really cool. And there's multiple different ways to set up snapshots in Helix. I probably can't cover it all right now, but a really cool thing you can do is actually have effects that exist outside of snapshots. So a common way I see players use snapshots is maybe not only to turn their effects on and off and up and down, but maybe they'll set up an amp model to go from clean to crunch to dirty to lead, all using snapshots. And what's nice about that is if I want to have effects that I can control just like normal sound boxes, I can. I'm just going to hit the action button and you have this option to turn snapshot bypass off. That means no matter what snapshot I'm on, this is just going to affect as a normal on and off stomp box. So if I ever just needed, a little more dirt for a part, I can just go ahead and hit on this overdrive at will. So you have a lot of control options when it comes to Helix, setting up snapshots and building your tones. All right, so I think we've heard some decent amount of sound today. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the ways you can run Helix in a live setting, especially when it comes to a house of worship.
Hey Doc, before you jump onto that, we had a question come in from Dan Pelletier, folks. I shout out to Dan from Audio Technica. He's a proud owner of a Helix, and he would like to know if you could quick go over that trails, how you set that, how you trail
Absolutely.
from one to the other when you switch tones, so that you don't get that audio break. If you
Yeah,
could go
that's
over
a
that one
great
more time.
question. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Dan. So I'm going to head back to my unit. And just so kind of everybody knows what Dan is asking here, really quickly, I just want to demonstrate what happens when we're switching between presets and how we have that audio cut off. So I'm just going to, hold the chord here. And you probably heard as I switch there, very minute, very small, but there's still that little audio gap that happens. And sometimes, for certain playing situations, you're not going to want that. It's not going to be musical. So the easiest way to set this up is if we actually head to a delay or reverb block and we page over to the last parameter. It's always going to be the last parameter on the delay or reverb. You're going to see this trails option, and you're just going to want to set that to on. So let me turn off all these kind of crazy sounds real quick. Let me head to this reverb over here called the glitz. I already have my trail set to on, but now as I play and I turn that off, it kind of rings out over that. So this will work for turning individual effects on and off, as well as we solve for the snapshots feature. So when we're switching between different, snapshots, presets within a preset almost, we also have that spillover. Awesome. Thanks for that question, Dan.
So
Hopefully
that'll
that
work.
gives you
That'll work going clean to dirty, dirty to clean, anything to anything, basically, right? Full effects,
exactly.
full effects are totally dry to the ambient, from ambient to all out distortion.
Exactly. Yep, you have that level of control if you want. You have that level of spillover. And another real cool thing that's sort of hiding in the Helix, like I said, it plays well with any analog gear. So on the back of the Helix, there's actually 4 effects loops where if you want to run it out to an analog amp, or if you have, your favorite pedals that aren't modeled in Helix that you want to run into here, you can. And you can actually have the effects loop set to have trails on it. So if you have a favorite reverb or delay that you want to run with Helix, you can even have that slowly taper off as it shuts off. So really cool stuff.
Perfect. All right, I'll let you get on with the presentation there.
Sure thing. Thank you for that. All right, let's go ahead and talk about using Helix in this live setting here. So let me switch back to my PowerPoint real quick, take you through a few slides here. So what's really popular in the house of worship performance setting is called the silent stage. Basically lets the singers and any speakers hear themselves, and it gives the front of house engineer plenty of control over the sound. Of course, guitar players, we all know we start the show, with our amp on 6 or something, and then by the end of the show it's crept up to 8 or even 10 or something like that. We're all guilty of it. But this is really powerful with Helix, is that you could just run straight into front of house, and you could go mono or stereo here. And then a lot of, house of worships now are switching to in-ear monitors where all that sound is just piped directly back into your ears. And being that you're getting a direct sound from Helix straight to the board, what comes out of Helix, what goes to the board and comes back is going to be that same tone preserved. So it's really nice to know that whatever you've cooked up in your board is what's going to come out of the front of house PA and what's going to end up being what comes back in your ears. So this is one way you can go ahead and run Helix in a house of worship setting. Oops. All right, the next option is going to be using an odd stage monitor. As guitar players, we're pretty used to having, something making noise right behind us. I know I am, and usually when I play on stage, I'll either bring out the Line 6 power cab or another sort of what's called FRFR monitor. If you're not familiar with the term FRFR, it means full range flat response. Full range meaning it's giving us all the way from 20 hertz up to 20K, and that basically, gives us a full sonic image of whatever we're trying to recreate inside Helix. And then the flat response means that there's no tonal coloring, there's no EQ shaping coming out of that monitor. So sometimes you may be familiar with consumer electronics that have added bass or highs or things like that. Full range flat response is just as it sounds. Full range, no coloring, flat response. So oftentimes running it on stage, I'll have, a PA style speaker behind me or a power cab for a more traditional amp look and feel. And I did put this stereo as a dotted line here because traditionally you just monitor yourself in mono, that's the easiest. But with Helix, you do have that flexibility. If you're running stereo sounds, you could also monitor yourself in stereo. And like I mentioned, we could use the Line 6 power cab too for onstage monitoring. This is what I'm actually using to monitor today for this setup. And this is really cool because of course you can connect to it using the traditional XLR 1/4 inch out. Helix has stereo of both, or you could use what's called the proprietary Line 6 link. So it's just one cable that not only sends audio, but it could also send commands to PowerCab. So if you needed to tell PowerCab to change IRs or speaker models or any of the other cool things it can do, you can actually control that from Helix. And then to connect another PowerCab, you're just going to daisy chain them with the Line 6 link, and they automatically take care of all the left and right types of things for you. So it really works as an all-in-one ecosystem. It's actually really cool when you pair a Helix with a power cab. But this is another option for monitoring on stage. Let's keep moving here. This one's going to be a little different. This one's a little more complicated. You can, of course, run your Helix just into the front of an analog amp. Traditionally, if you're going to do that, you're going to be using Helix as an effects-only device. So that means you're not going to be using the amp or cab modeling. Being that if you're running an amp and cab into a physical amp and cab, that can end up being redundant, and it may not give you the best tonal results. There are ways, however, to make use of the digital preamps inside Helix with your physical analog amp, and that's what's known as the 4-cable method. So here's a quick diagram of it, and I'll just kind of talk through how this works basically. Basically, inside of Helix, you would choose a digital preamp, and then you're able to swap that out using your amp's effects loop. So you could go between your digital preamp, let's say, to your amp's physical preamp, and this also lets you place effects pre and post your amp's own preamp. So a lot of different tonal options here, especially when you're running 4-cable method. You don't get all the great cab sounds and the full amp model from Helix, but it's a really neat way to run things if you're using a traditional amp and that's kind of the method or route you want to go. So once again, using this, you can actually switch between different sound preamps in Helix. Let's say, for instance, that your amp on stage is a Fender Deluxe and it has an effects loop. You could actually maybe throw in like a Marshall preamp from the Helix, or a Vox preamp, and run that with your Fender amp. Get all sorts of different tonal colors that you typically wouldn't out of that amp. So that's one way you can do it. There's also a way you could run a hybrid version of 4-cable method and still send a digital cab sim sound out to the front of house. This is probably the most complex setup of them all, but occasionally I do see players do this, and just to kind of show off everything Helix can do, I figured I'd throw it in. So once again, you're running 4-cable method, and then you're also applying a digital cab sim signal to the front of house. And kind of how this ends up looking in Helix, if we follow my signal chain, it would be we have a volume pedal, a compressor, a distortion. There's our effects loop that sends things back and forth to the amp. There's the Helix preamp. We have some effects that would be placed in the amp's effects loop. And then I have this Y split here. And basically, if we follow it along, one end goes out to the 1/4-inch outputs on Helix, and that would go to your amp on stage without the cab model. And then we could take that second path down. We go through our cab model, and you could send that processed cab sound via XLR out to the front of the house. So you wouldn't get the exact same sound that you're having on stage because your amp is ultimately different than the Helix cab model, but this can be another way to run things that can be pretty cool. So let's talk about some other live stream solutions. I'm sure a lot of you have had to switch to different live streams, whether it's in your own music or whether it's in your house of worship performance, and Helix can make this really easy. We also have some other modelers that I'm going to mention too that can work just as well. But super simple setup. You can just plug Helix in, direct USB to your computer, and pipe audio in that way. That's how I'm doing the setup today. And then on your end, you just either need some headphones or studio monitors so you can monitor that sound. If you're playing in a full band, there's some different ways you can run this. Depending on the strength of your computer, you could USB in Helix and have multiple USB devices going into your computer and process it that way. Or what I've seen commonly some bands do, and some friends of mine that I've spoken to who play in these settings and are currently doing these live streams, is that somebody at their church has a USB mixer or a USB audio interface. They're able to route all the instruments into that, plug it in via USB, and then send the sound out like that. So any of those live solutions that I gave you using XLR and 1/4-inch can still end up being useful in a live stream setting if you decide to go this full band into a USB mixer or audio interface. This is the setup I'm using today for anybody who was curious. Like I said, I have my Helix via USB into my MacBook. I'm using a USB microphone. I'm using my PowerCab 112 Plus here. That's for just monitoring, let me hear my room sound. And then finally, going into my MacBook, which has a built-in webcam. All my additional webcams are just iPhones, so, keeping it very DIY here. And then besides Helix, we have some other modeling options. So what's cool about Helix is, it has multiple IOs. Like I said, it has 4 sends and returns, XLR, quarter inch out, tons of things going on here. You can run multiple signal paths, but for some players, you don't need all these extra features. You really just need something that's simple, plug and play. You plug your guitar into it, you plug into the board, you're good to go. Not a lot of setup, not a lot of deep diving and tweaking. So that's where maybe some of these other products might come in. We have the Pod Go, which is still a complete tone solution for standalone use. It has that built-in expression pedal there. It has what we call a semi-fixed DSP. So that means that certain items are always going to be present in your signal chain. For instance, you'll always have a wah, you'll always have a volume pedal, you always have an EQ and an amp and cab. Whereas the Helix or HX Stomp are completely customizable. You put whatever you want in that signal chain. As I said, single amp cab IR option. You're not going to run multiple amps with PodGo. And then assignable foot switches. So really, this has, pretty much everything you need just to plug into a front of house PA and go. With an amp plus 4 effects, that's, plenty for most playing situations. Then we jump over to the HX Stomp, which is more compact, and it's designed really to fit on a pedal board, though it can also be standalone too. I've certainly ran it that way. But for anybody who, has a collection of pedals or maybe doesn't want to completely move away from that world, the HX Stomp can be really good. And you could run it as your amp modeler. You can run it as an effects only unit. And it's also nice to have on your board if you are running as effects only unit. Let's say your amp goes down. You also have a whole collection of great amp models right at your disposal. So if your analog amp ever, bites the dust during a performance, you still have options to get through the show. So that's a really cool feature. So HX Stomp has a lot of different case uses here. It doesn't have a built-in expression pedal, but you can add up to 2 using external jacks. It has what we call the dynamic DSP, so it's not fixed. Like I said, you can run, 2 amps. You could run, 6 different stereo effects if you want. It also has parallel processing, which we don't find on PodGo. This means that you could drop effects into parallel paths and you can have some separation and have some clearer sound. Also great for running multiple amps, cabs, things like that. And it has the same touch capacitive foot switches that I mentioned from the bigger Helix. And of course, today we've been using the big Helix, which is a complete tone solution for standalone use. It has that built-in expression pedal, dynamic DSP with up to 4 signal paths. So if you wanted to, you could discretely process 4 different musicians, have them coming into 4 different inputs and 4 separate outputs. Multiple cabs, amps, IRs, the touch capacitive foot switches, customizable scribble strips. So you may have noticed those little screens over each of those foot switches, super powerful on a dark stage. And then finally, as I've mentioned a couple times, extensive I/O and control capability. This bigger Helix is the one that has the 4 effects loops. It has a microphone, an XLR input, which you won't find on any of the others, and a whole host of digital I/O, MIDI, SPDIF, AES, EBU. And then just to introduce you to the rest of the Helix family, today I've been using the Helix floor, that's the one in red there, but we also make a rack version. This is really great for, of course, studio environments, but maybe besides, your church gig, you play out to a rowdy bar crowd. And if you pair your Helix rack with the Helix control, that means maybe your brain is sitting somewhere behind you away from, the rowdy crowd. And if somebody were to spill a beer, it's just going to go on your Helix control and your brain's still running. So sometimes people like it for that reason. The Helix LT is going to be a more streamlined version of the bigger Helix. It has all the same amps and effects, same routing capabilities, just a little bit less I/O. So it only has 2 effects loops instead of 4, no additional XLR in. And you'll also notice that it doesn't have those scribble strips over each foot switch. We also make a plug-in version of Helix. So if you really just want these tones to access in the studio, you could check out the plugin. You have the same library of amps, effects, and cabs in there. And you also have all the same routing capabilities, same presets sharing capabilities. If you built a preset in Helix native, you could drag it into your Helix floor or your rack or LT and vice versa. So it's really an all-in-one ecosystem. And then of course, as I mentioned, we have the HX Stomp. That's kind of like, the smaller version of this. It has all the same amps, effects, not as much routing capabilities, but you could still get into parallel paths and things like that. And then finally, HX effects. This is going to be just the Helix effects, so none of the amps, none of the cabs, And this is meant to run with, your favorite analog amp. You still are interested in all these awesome sounds, but you just want to stick with your analog amp. HX Effects is great for that. It also plays well with other gear. It has 2 effects loops. It has controls out if you want to control an amp that has switching from it or different things like that. Another powerful unit. All right. Um, yeah. So that's kind of what I had to say about Helix here. Basically, really powerful all-in-one unit for house of worship settings. The ability to just go to front of house, have no sound on stage. Very popular in today's house of worship settings. Very cool things. Hey, Jim.
Awesome. Hey, I was going to stress that, if you had to say what is the biggest advantage of having the Helix, if any of you guys out there have ever played in a live situation, the guitar player, in order to get the sound a lot of times that he wants, has to drive that amp and has to drive it pretty hard, and they end up being pretty loud. At the fact that you can do that all internally within this thing and send the feedback to the front of house, and there is no amp screaming on stage, and they have full control over it. So you have to control that volume in a house of worship, but you can still get that nice full distortion as you showed, combining all the different the chain and how you tweak each one to get those different tones is excellent. It's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, traditionally, in a house of worship, you're not going to bring your big Marshall stack and your whole space station of pedal boards on stage. But sometimes, the song may demand for those types of sounds, and having a compact way to do that and a controlled way to do that, super important, super helpful to all the other musicians. People are going to like you as the guitar player.
Yeah, a big sheet of plexiglass does only goes so far, like with drummers. And a lot of house of worship drummers are switching to the digital drums. They get that full drum sound, but not that all on stage volume. So it's great. I do have a handful of questions that built up here. First off, assuming the firmware updates are just through the USB, is that correct?
Yep,
Oh,
that's right. Yep, and if anybody's curious about firmware updates, basically every, 4 to 6 months, we come out with another firmware update where basically we add new amp models, new cabs, new effects, and new features all for free. So right now everybody's talking about the 3.0 update and when is it going to come out. So cool stuff.
and this has an auxiliary input, correct? The Helix, the floor does.
Yep.
So
So
Ricardo's asking, give us an example. What would you use that aux in for?
great question.
And
So
how
the
does
way
that
the
route?
aux
I guess, how does that route? Does that actually go through the effects and everything, or does it bypass it? Go ahead.
Sure, sure. So you have some options on how you want to set that up. Basically, the aux in default is almost just like another 1/4 inch in jack, and it ends up working really well for anything that has a high output, like let's say an active instrument, something with active pickups, I mean. So that's the traditional use of the aux in jack. You can also use any of the effects returns as additional inputs. So if you just wanted to route something in to, let's say, pipe an MP3 in or something like that, you could use one of the additional returns to do that.
Excellent. This question comes from Nigel out in California. He's asking, when you were dialing in a lot of those, you could see that the volumes went to 10. Do any of them go to 11?
That's a great question. As fun as it would be, and I kind of wish we could. We keep it 10 just to keep it, even across the board.
Maybe in an update coming out, you'll have the spinal tap setting where the
Yeah, right.
volumes
Then
do go to 11. All right.
I would dig it.
I had to throw that one in there.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is not a question about the Helix, but we're gonna jump back and ask you personally: have you ever performed with or worked with Michael Jorgensen or Nels Klein in your time
No,
in Chicago?
I wish I could say I have. Big Nels Klein fan. No, I've seen those guys live, but I've never worked with them.
That again, in the future, you got to make that happen, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The next update, we'll
yeah. If
find
we
a
can
way
make
in
that
there.
happen.
Uh, So you answered Dan's question about the trailing. And Dan, just a
Mhm.
quick shout out again. I am using my Audio Technica headphones, as I usually do for all of my webinars, and love Audio Technica as far as headphones and studio headphones. Love it. All right, this one comes from Ricardo. Any latency concerns with IEMs?
Gotcha. Um, it's something, a situation I'm less familiar with playing with, but I wouldn't assume so. As long as, as long as you're not, yeah, I would assume it would be fine. It's something I'm kind of stumbling over just because I haven't done it in so long. It's something I've done less of, but it's just sending audio back and forth. There really shouldn't be any latency there.
It's speed of light back to the front of house, and as long yeah, and coming back, it shouldn't be an issue. So, all right, do the floor and rack models have exact same DSP features?
Ah, that's a great question. Yeah, so between the rack, the floor, and the LT, they all have the exact same DSP features. So if you built a preset in the LT, I could drag it over to my rack, I could drag it over to the floor, would work and sound exactly the same.
Excellent. I think that's pretty much it. Great presentation. Um, I'm sure you have videos out there as well, more videos at Online 6 with demos on that. So everybody feel free to check that out. Any last thoughts that you want to throw in there, Doc, before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, sure. I know we got a couple more minutes. If anybody wants, I can maybe take them through a quick run through the editor and maybe just show them how we build a preset from scratch, how easy it is really to
Perfect.
use.
That would be ideal.
Awesome. Yeah, let me switch back to my editor here. And right now I'm just in one of the factory set lists, so I'm just going to select a new preset here, kind of take you through it, start to finish, how we might build a new preset. So I'm just going to select along my signal chain here. I'm going to start in the middle. You'll notice that an empty block appears. And then I'm just going to head to my color-coded model list down here in the corner. And these color codings go all the way back to, the big green DL4, delay is always green. As I go down here, we're going to get to some of the amp and cab offerings. So you could choose amp plus cab. That'll give you the amp plus the expected match cab. So if I chose a Fender Twin, you'll get 2x12 with gentians, so on and so forth. You can mix and match your amps and cabs. You could use third-party impulses. You could use just the preamp section, as I mentioned, if you're running 4-cable method. But we could go ahead and just kind of scroll through my amp and cab list here. A lot of classic models here, obviously with their own kind of spin on the names here. There's even some bass models. I shouldn't say some, there's a good library of bass stuff going on in here from Ampeg, Aguilar, Mesa, all the classics. There's even one of Billy Sheehan's personal Pierce models modeled in there, so that's pretty cool. But I can go ahead and just select an amp model here. Like I showed you before, we have all our things we can tweak. We head over to the cab here. We could change the mic, the distance, bring in some room sound using early reflections. Very cool stuff. Then we could start adding some effects around that. So if I wanted to run some effects in front of my amp, let's say if I want to add an overdrive up front, I'll head to that distortion category. I can go ahead and select from the list. You'll see some classic offerings, some more esoteric and boutique type stuff too in there. Maybe I'll choose the classic Tube Screamer. And then here's something really cool. The parallel pass and Helix. I mentioned those a couple times, but I didn't really discuss them. These are really cool ways to, you could do so many things with them, but let me show you one thing. So let's say we're kind of making an ambient tone or a tone that features delay and reverb. I'm just going to go ahead and select this simple delay, and let's not dial it in yet. Let's just give it a quick playthrough, see how it sounds. So there's a decent amount of repeats happening there, and we'll just leave that as it is for now. And then I'm going to go ahead and dial up a reverb. I'm going to choose this Searchlights, and I'm familiar with this reverb. I know it's very wet, so I'm just going to turn it down off right out of the gate. And so now we have a clean tone. We follow my signal chain. Our amp feeds into this delay. All those delay repeats feed into my reverb. Ends up sounding like this. It's not a bad tone, but it ends up being a little cluttered because we have all those delay repeats feeding into the reverb along with my guitar tone. There's just a lot going on. So really simple, what I can do is click on this delay, and I'm just going to drag it down, and this creates a parallel path. So now we have a split. It's an even Y split out to both effects, reverb and delay, and neither are going to interact with each other. So now when I play, hopefully you can hear all those repeats a lot clearer among that reverb ambience. Doesn't get as cluttered, doesn't get as muddied. Some other things, if we want to get, crazy with parallel paths, I'll kind of clear these effects out real quick. We could actually set it up to switch between two different amps. So right now I have a sort of Fender clean amp on there. I'm going to go ahead and choose something maybe a little more overdriven like this Friedman style model. And I can actually set up two paths here. And if I click on my split here, I can go from an even Y split to an actual AB. And so I can go ahead and assign that to a foot switch. If I had to, let's see my controller here, it's automatically going to set up to go between A100 to B100. And let me go ahead and change that real quick. So now we're on my Fender clean. Switching to that dirty Friedman channel like that. So really cool ways you can run multiple amps, switch between them just like you would on an analog board.
Very cool. And now you can control where you put things in that signal path. I guess this may come down to a preference on your own. When using EQ, would you put that before or after you're going to drive the sound?
Good question. Yeah, that will be a little bit of preference. Sometimes when I'm using EQ, it usually does end up being post after I kind of dial in an amp model, and then I think, maybe it needs a little more top end something or bottom, then I can boost it. Sometimes though, you may want to shape the tone just going into the amp, and you could do that too. That's sometimes why we gravitate towards an overdrive pedal, because maybe it boosts the mids or things like that.
So just a matter of preference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one
Okay.
of the things about Helix is there's so many things you can do, and I always tell people, well, if you can think it, you can do it. You just gotta think of it first.
I love the fact that you can very quickly, easily change the chain. The guys that have those pedal boards that are just one pedal after another, cables running everywhere. To do that takes a half an hour to push something, push the chorus before the EQ. All
Yeah,
the rewiring here is just drag and drop, right?
right. And it's super easy to do it on the unit too, I can show you. So let's say, you got to the gig and you decided you needed to rearrange your board. You're right, doing that analog isn't gonna be very easy. If I switch my screens real quick so we could see my overhead view, let's say if I just needed to reorder this tube screamer with this optical trem, I'm just gonna hit my action button to pick that effect up. I can move it left or right, up and down, and just reorder like that. If I needed to clear it or copy and paste it somewhere, super easy
Done.
to do.
That's amazing. Just done, just like that. It's a quick fix before a gig or a quick change.
Absolutely.
Love it. All right, so that's it. Dan, or Doc, Dan. I don't know where that came from. I'm still thinking about Dan Pelletier and the Helix that he has on his own. Uh, so thank you so much. A great presentation. Good to hear you play as well. Wish again, you inspired me. You didn't cause me to quit. You inspired me to practice more. So that's a good thing.
Great.
So
Yeah, thank
um,
you guys so much for having me. This has been a ton of fun.
yeah, we'll definitely have you back in the future. It's got a lot of features, and I'm sure we could come up with another way to come at this, and possibly go over all the in the Helix line, all of the other Line 6 uh, offerings that you have as well. So once again, thanks, Doc. We're going to wrap things up here, folks. Um, those of you that have any further questions for Doc or myself or about this item, go ahead and email me directly at jripp@fullcompass.com. That's jrip@fullcompass.com. And I really do appreciate everybody's watching and your questions. Thank you so much for everybody. And we will see you on the flip side. And don't forget, don't forget to fill out that survey as you exit. That is very helpful for us to pick the subjects that you want to hear about. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you in the next one.